You know what God can do that angels can't do? I've got the complete intention of the angels. They probably read my mind right now. God has infinite wisdom, as angels don't. What does that mean? Well, God can see in the future a heck a lot further than any angel can. If you were playing a game, then say like, um, let's see what would be a good example. Well, any game, we'll say pool. If you were playing pool, God could do some super trick shots, and the devil couldn't. I mean, they're constrained by time. They're constrained by the change of choice. Okay, now, physics, but you know, I think at best all Satan could do is making a clone of your soul, stick it off on the side, run it up a little bit faster, slow you down a bit, run the simulation, show the outcome of the clone, figure out what it is you're going to do next, then come back and mess with you because you're pretty much going to make the same choices as the clone. But that's as far as it gets. It doesn't get very far in the future. So Satan, this whole time, and he's completely mesmerized by this whole game. And his ego is high enough that he says, "I've got a good enough brain. I can probably beat God." Mm. That's the funny thing, is that I know something that even Satan probably doesn't even know, and or Satan doesn't want to know, or doesn't want to believe, or probably already knows and just doesn't want the rest of us to know, is that God can kick his ass, you know, because he just doesn't have the capacity to do the things that he thought he did. And that's the reason why it's kind of like you get to be big enough, you get bigger than God, where you think you can see all of God, of what God is, and God hasn't completely revealed everything, because if God did, that would be kind of really screwed up. If God could be vulnerable, which he can't be vulnerable, or God is unique, by the way, not a he. Same with the devil. Devil can be he, but I think that's really just for our our culture in the past really kind of separated, really kind of put more emphasis on the males than on the females, because people didn't give females enough significance. Probably a reason why. Um, well, of course, probably who's going to actually be birthing the kid, not the male or the female, you know, because that information wasn't known well ahead of time. That there wasn't any birthing of children until after the original sin. So who was to have the children, the female or male? Was that all involved in the planet from the very beginning? Was there going to be any children? Was there any concept of these beings actually, anything bad happening, pain or anything like that? That wasn't there. It's even questionable that they even had two eyes in front of their heads. So there's probably a lot of things that we think we know about Adam and Eve that wasn't there. You know. So what I'm revealing is just creative thought. That's all I'm revealing. I'm not 100% certain of those things. I may be bullshitting you the whole way through, but it's all because of the way my brain works. Is that I tend to imagine, I do what ifs all over the place, and it may not be biblical, but keep in mind the Bible doesn't tell you certain things because they were never there in the first place. There was room for creative thought, and the stuff I'm talking about isn't going to change the religion or anything like that. It's just going to give you something to think about, you know. And I mean, there was this song in a Rolling Stones song called "Sympathy for the Devil," and you cannot make one mistake like that unless you're so empathetic that you think everything's empathetic. The devil, what triggers empathy, what triggers our empathy is the beginning to recognize um, that we're like somebody else, and so it's possible for us to empathize, but without logic, we wouldn't realize that you can't empathize with the devil because, for one thing, what triggers empathy is the belief that what you're looking at, these pictures you're looking at of the devil, and you probably don't even know what the devil looks like, or nobody really does. It's all an artist rendition from the past. Nobody knows what the devil looks like, okay? We think it's man-like, got two eyes, mouth, and all that stuff. Why would God make anything look like man, or even, why should God's self even look like man? Because we're creating his image. No, we're creating his spiritual image, not his image, not God's image, okay? Spiritual image, not actual image, okay? That's something to fix there. And then, so how do you know that? I said, well, a lot of our culture and everything borrowed from the Bible, borrowed from what these people were talking about God and all that. And so a lot of the stuff that we've got in our culture extrapolated from what they thought they heard, not what that was actually written. Just like whenever you're listening to Pink Floyd and they say the root of all evil says money after so they say, and the reason why they put so they say in is because one of those guys went back and looked in the Bible and then noticed that that they couldn't say what they were going to say, because what they were really pointing to in the Bible was greed, the love of money, not money, the love of money. If you go and you look in your Bible, you find out this to be the truth. So instead of saying they would be completely false, and so to avoid saying a lie, they enter in an opinion, a little thing that you say at the beginning, just like I was talking about Fox News. Whenever they want to inject opinion, they say some say, so they say, same idea, okay? So to avoid, to interject opinion so as to say, I'm imprecise, I don't really know what, I'm assuming, okay? So in that respect, they could put it in the song and not have some lawyer come after them, which is, there's potential to that, I guess. Especially if you got a lawyer and you're religious and you claim that Pink Floyd came and screwed with your religion or is trying to push something, and Pink Floyd's going like, what's your problem is with your record? Well, it could possibly it's all opinion. It says, well, there's one thing in there that's screwed up, and it says the love of that the money is the root of all evil, and it says, oh shit. So they say, so they say, and that's really to cover that they're trying to attribute the root of all evil with money, and they left out a word, the love of money, greed, okay? So greed is the root of all evil, okay? It's not money, it's greed, okay? And you can apply greed to pretty much anything, even greed of being a Christian, thinking that you could, and it's called self-righteousness, okay? And I can't even claim self-righteousness because I know I'm flawed. I put it out in front of your face every time I talk, and that is I've got a porn addiction. That's my form of self-deprecation. It's not really humility, but it's self-deprecation. Humility is realizing that it is putting it out forth that I can't even really go on with talking about this because I'm completely unworthy. And that's the fact. That's the fact with every evangelist. if they ever go out there with any kind of pride and self-righteousness, they're basically saying, I've never made a sin. Some of them will say, I'm sin-free, but they don't give you the rest of that, is that how the sin is defined, is that Jesus um, is essentially devaluing it's actually kind of God is forgiving us for our sins, because there's a covenant, there's an eternal covenant between us and God, and that's Jesus, and Jesus is offering the capacity to forgive between God and us. Okay, and that's where the sinlessness comes from, is that without Jesus there, God wouldn't remember um, the humanistic aspect, the creation, the wouldn't that they now know a bit more, and you know and are trying to do, as the rest of the world is completely ignorant of God, and at best the world has empathy, the empathy part, but it can be screwed with and stuff. So in one case, it's kind of like saying, you can kick ass on the world, but you can't kick ass on these guys that are trying to retain, or trying to who have a conscience, okay, and are sticking to that rather than working against the conscience. You know, the ones that rebel against God eternally until their death. That's the thing that's if you just keep rebelling, if you turn away from the idea that there is a God, that there is a creation, that everything in the universe was created by God, and you decide that none of it was created by God, and you just continue to believe that, and won't even check to see if you're incorrect, or even ponder the idea, that's the ultimate sin. That's the unforgivable sin right there, and it's never going. And it's unforgivable in that it's possible that I've already done this, but I didn't really know I was doing it, and I still felt at the very my core that there is God and all this stuff. The problem is that I went through to a point, and I was living off my father's money and stuff, and I was out gonna look. I was wondering why it wasn't that I couldn't get a job anywhere, and I had tried so hard. And it may have been the case that it wasn't God's will for me to have a job, but in my limited imagination, in my limited perception, I thought that there was something completely wrong, and it wasn't that I could never imagine not having a job, and seeing the future as potential doom. I couldn't see how far enough to see, or even see that certain kind of things that God might actually say, well, you don't really need a job because people are going to look after you, and you're different from the rest. And I didn't think about that. There's a potential there for that there. And so in my perception, I turned around and I rebelled against God, because that didn't hit me, and it felt like my I felt like my survival was being challenged. That somehow God didn't care about um, my means of survival, and that's what caused me to rebel. And I wasn't saying that God didn't exist; is that I was just really upset, and I was just cursing God, which you don't do. So the thing is my belief as to what the ultimate sin is that you just give up on believing God, and you just go the opposite direction, and don't look back. And you probably think about that time whenever there's Sodom and Gomorrah, and those people are going up the side of the hill, and the wife turns back and looks at Sodom and Gomorrah. It was this city where people are performing sodomy. That's where the Sodom comes from, is from that town, and or the people, the Sodom, whatever. So the thing is that she turns back, and she it's a complete flip from you know, whenever you're turning away from sin, and you're and they've been told some simple operation is you don't turn back and look at the town. She was she turned around and looked at the town, and she turned into a pillar of salt. So the idea was is that you never turn back and look at the town or something like that. Um, in the same way, if you decide that there isn't a God, and you just keep plotting on and you don't look back, then that's the ultimate sin. But if you look back, there's a concern for there that I maybe there was something, a chance that I really kind of misinterpreted this, and so that was probably a thing that could turn her back from salt into a person. You know, if that was the in the other case, it was that she was doing good and she turned back to this town that was performing a lot of bad, and turned into a pillar of salt. And when confronted with the Pharisees, Jesus said to them, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, I'm just saying this is my imagination going, so I could be completely wrong, but I do know that Jesus said to the Pharisees who were trying to push all this law that came out of those times that the Jewish people thought was absolute law, and that if you didn't follow these things, then you're screwed, at least for even for your life, and that you would take the lives of animals and stuff to get the blood to be the covenant between you and God, by which God would see you as that you weren't going to sin anymore. And at the end of that whole thing, everybody coming to the realization that still wasn't working even when Jesus came on the earth, that the Pharisees were still were taking the law, using it to give them a leg up on everybody else, when in reality they were doing their own thing. And we all have that problem. Everybody's, even the Christians, I mean, even we all have the problem, and we can't separate ourselves from everybody else because we're all in the same boat. Even when we do, to some extent, even when we do become Christian, okay, that we get baptized and stuff, that there's a potential that we don't have to keep taking the life of a animal. However, if we keep acting, keeping away, if we get to the point to where we just, that conscience that tells you this is wrong, can't have any effect, and you just make the decision not to believe in God, then that's the ultimate sin. But there's somewhere back in your head and you think this is wrong, then there's a potential there. But God will probably let the demons kind of carry it out, because it also says in the Bible, it says, and the only reason why I know this is because of the fear of going to hell, the fear of God, the fear of what ends up whenever you just don't. So when you have the fear, it's going to drive you to the Bible, and you're going to read, and you're going to try to come up with enough evidence to say that you're not completely screwed, okay? And there's something in there that says if you ever are to not believe in the truth and you believe in a lie, God's going to push forth a grand delusion to believe, or a grand delusion. You're going to not have the capacity to ever think that there's a truth. Is to put forth a grand delusion to make you believe to believe the lie. And I don't know if that means that there was a potential for me to like actually forget God because I grew up with this understanding and stuff. God made God has a choice. God can intervene at any point and say, okay, for this person it's not going to be, for everybody else it's this way. We don't know if that occurs, but God has a choice. You can't. God can will to do. I mean, if you look in the Bible, God would will someone to do something, then they would negotiate with them, and God would say, "Okay, I'll let you do this." Okay, God will negotiate with you if it's in God's interest to do so. But I can't. I can't since we all have sin and we all make mistakes and we got transgression because we all have transgression. We got that one sin that we just can't throw away. That we try to throw away, but we just can't. And even when we do throw it away, and we think our friends thought we throw it away, we'll go out there and say we throw it away when we know full well that we didn't throw it away. There is that one too, and every single evangelist down all these televangelists, particularly the ones that are making money off of their evangelism, because I don't believe should be able to make money off of evangelism because it's a spiritual gift, and if you have a spiritual gift and you're charging for it, you're charging ransom, you're keeping people away from good based on your own greed and your lack of faith that you're not going to be able to make enough money in order to go in the future. And it also kind of depends on what you're using that money on. If it's on a charity, then that's a different thing. But if it's not, the thing is what you're using it for. And then you got these guys that are doing the prosperity prayer, and what they're doing is they're taking advantage of your concern for the future, and thinking that somehow you can engineer God. You can engineer God. You can manipulate God. And so if you give money to the evangelist, and the evangelist claims that and is actually manipulating you, but you're thinking that you can get a leg up on God and God will treat you specially. And I'm making the same mistake too. So this is probably not something I can get into, but that's the thing, is that I can't really say that I'm saved. And I've told people this, is that I've made a mistake in the past. And I'm hoping, because that's all you have as a human. And I would say that even if you are a Christian, that you still should have hope, because you don't know what can really screw things up there. And I'm struggling with it. Okay, what I'm struggling with more is whether I'm saved. And other people would say, "Oh, you're saved," and I said, "I don't know that." So, because there are things that I've done that some Christians would say, you can't ever say there isn't a God. And then there's some that says, as long as you still feel like you are that you feel there is a God, even though you said there isn't a God, that there is a God, then you're still convicted by that feeling, still have the feeling, then you do. And so there isn't, so that you don't have the same problem as these other guys who never grew up with but they did. Everybody did. Everybody grew up with the mystery and the wonderment of life, and looking around and asking their parents and said, "So, how did a tree?" And their parents said, "It's by evolution. Everything's by evolution," but they don't have enough. But they're also in wonderment, and they're kind of wondering, how does this evolutionary theory actually lead to that? They're believing in a lie, and then God's pushing forth the belief in that lie. And I would like to go there to say that that nobody could possibly do that without like really thinking about stuff. But yeah, people are believing so much in science that science has got an answer to it that they're not even willing to go and check out and see what's going on there. And there's really no reason for me to challenge it because, as it's said in the Bible, it said if you go forward to fail to believe the truth, you will believe a lie because it'll put forth that belief. Now you could reason that a whole bunch of other ways, and so well maybe the other things, other directions are truth. And I'd say, well, that's I don't think you can really say that because how much other things out there can give you something that makes you believe it is, okay. Other things are okay. I mean, we can be lenient, but we don't know how lenient God can be on such things, and if at all. And that's the reason why people just baptize their children the minute they come out of the womb, like the Catholics do. Is that, if this thing works, but they're engineering God again, it's the same idea. Is that, hey, look, if it works, did the child actually agree to it, and the other thing is does God hold children by this thing until they maybe hit puberty? Okay, because by the time they hit puberty, then that's when the clock starts. Okay, it may be even further along until you hit 30, until you hit close to 30, which is when Jesus's mission started. He had to be baptized, and then he got tempted by the devil. And after he satisfied that goal that he could be out in the desert, and Jesus did that. We don't have to do that, go out and be tempted like that. But that was how he started his mission. And that's when the whole thing, whether or not I believe that the minute he was baptized, that was the point at which the whole thing started. Then, okay, this is when it starts, not when he was born. This is when it starts, whether he's sinful or sinless or something. I don't know, but that's what I believe is the case. And then this is where it starts, and he goes to the end. When he's on the cross, his blood is drawn. That's when the covenant, because it's probably that was when he was spiritually birthed. That before he was just birthed, he wasn't spiritually. He didn't get the. So he had God's stuff, but there was probably a little bit of a lenient time that I just don't know. That I'm grabbing at straws. I'm trying to make sense of that, and I'm so I can't really go there. And so there's a lot of places that I can't go that I've gone that hopefully I would be forgiven. But the other thing is that I've already done something extremely bad, and I don't know where I stand. That's the reason why I keep saying to everybody that I don't know heads or tails whether I'm going to hell or not. There's no lawyer that can really get you there. You can't really be just as you're in a court of law and you decide to go without a lawyer, it's really a bad idea because you don't know what they're going to pin you for, But then again, anybody can be hauled into a court of law for anything because lawyers do that all the time. And so the only thing you can really do is hope. But if you haven't been baptized, then there's I don't know. It's a big I don't know is what you put there. I wouldn't say that you could, but I think the thing is that if you can't believe our God, and don't take this as the absolute truth, but this is more me kind of hoping for others in the world that never get around to actually that we don't get around to presenting our case or the Christians don't get around to presenting the case, and, or the at the very least, that whether or not you believe in God, how do you come to that? Maybe you look at the stuff around you and you see there's a relatively large amount of complexity in it. You might have to prove it to yourself by going and being a scientist and doing enough research. And the research you're doing is into disproving God. And eventually you come to the realization that there's no possible way you can disprove God, or even disprove that this stuff was created, because that's pretty much what they're trying to do. And under their breath, they're not saying it outright, but under their breath they're saying there is no God, there is no God, there is, and they're doing the research and they're saying there is no God, and then all of a sudden they come to a point to where all of that stuff becomes really profound, and they find out they get humbled, because they get humbled by their own inability to understand, to inability to actually do enough research, their inability to prove what they thought they knew. That, for instance, that physicists try to water everything down to a simple formula, including nature, and then they find out there's more complexity to nature than they could ever, and that they couldn't predict even with simple physical properties. I mean, that's all physicists really have, is just the simple nature of physics. It doesn't count for things they don't have any understanding of, like quantum universes and stuff. They think they understand about that there's these quantum universes, parallel universes, and all this stuff. And really all they're doing is they're dealing with the capacity to manipulate chance, which is what I think quantum physics really is just the capacity to manipulate the outcomes, or to store, if you had a quantum memory, the way that you could store information on adjusting the outcomes of what might actually just be electrons bouncing off of stuff. Being able to store, to keep certain, this is what I would imagine to be, it's the capacity to keep certain things in place that would be just bouncing around by chance, but you're keeping them still in space and being held together by chance. And then from this, they derive other things, like that there's possible parallel universes and stuff like that. Whenever all they're doing is they're just controlling a physical state. They're creating a physical state that they can maintain if they could keep the electrons bouncing around the same way every time. And then when they need to change something else, they're maybe able to make the electrons bounce away in a different way to hold state. Because that's the bottom line of computer science. Whenever you're storing data, is you're trying to maintain the integrity of data by being able to keep a state to some extent. And error correction will permit you to keep state in an environment that fluctuates and where there is a potential for error. And that's the reason for error correction. And there's math for doing error correction, but you have to have a lot of extra data in order to maintain that the data is correct, as well as flipping bits when they get flipped. So the idea is some way of determining that the state is correct, or that there's consistency that can be maintained. That's all error correction is for. And so if you apply error correction, and then you apply some sort of statistical fluctuation state that can probably still be maintained by maybe having a few extra paddles in there that are making sure that the electrons, if they were like ping pong balls, keeping them back in the game, and those paddles are in there to do that. That's the error correction messing with the bits that are flipping. because our read system can only read where the electrons are at any particular time, but not all the time. And that we don't have any microscopes that can go down that far. And now I have to